Thank you. So now we can open the floor to questions.
Yes, of course. Sorry. That's what we're doing at the project at the moment. We're reviewing the court records, which also contain biological examinations and the results of these records. And the sad thing is that they were not reviewed. We're the first ones who really review all these court records. But yeah, it's still in a work in progress. You mean the legal, the legislation? Sorry. After 1945, there was a question which laws stay in force and which laws have to be changed, because they didn't want to introduce the whole legal system of 1938 again. So they decided that everything that has an ideological background needs to be removed. And this biological aspect was not removed. Actually, I mean, still you can the law that was introduced in 1943 was left like this, and only it was in the last 10 years that some legislation was altered. But actually, it did not went back to the legislation where the social status was more important than the biological paternity.
Questions. First, about the moves, I found it very interesting, and I wonder if there are lessons that we can learn from it to. The new discussion about cameras in courts that we have both in Europe and in the US. I think it's a way to use history and to edit it to the debate that is going on right now. So this is content. And the question is, Christina, I wonder about the relationship between the social equality concept, the question concept, and if you see similarities and mostly if you see differences between the two.
So similarities between rule of law and socialist legality. Basically, the idea of legality was to follow the law. And of course, I mean, the law also indicates what procedures should be taken and how law should be implemented. So under Khrushchev, at least, they were trying to implement it, including proper procedures. So, for example, there was an extension of the rights of advocates. At a certain protocols of advocates, of a meeting of Moscow advocates with a representative of the Ministry of Justice saying, if you want to keep and guarantee the rights of your citizens, you have to guarantee our rights as advocates in order to make sure that the law is observed. So they're not really speaking about due process, but they are speaking about following the law. And of course, as socialist legality gives it a certain interpretation that is not given in other places when we're talking only about rule of law. Although, of course, in the West, rule of law kind of hints, I mean, we're not talking about it, we're saying it is only the mechanism, but we do inject into that different general concepts of rights that are universal. We call them universal. We can argue whether they're Western or others. Okay.
Thank you for the comment. I have absolutely no doubt that there are going to be a lot of theoretical quarrels, and it's going to give some kind of another push, because I feel like a follower. All those law and film and history studies commenced really many years ago, in particular in France. And I think that it's going to grow further on. Why? Because we have such a proliferation of images of law and lawyers that is absolutely unprecedented in history. Which means that we could expect two new tasks for legal historians or for lawyers in general. One is to comment on popular culture. That's what we have already, that's what's going on now. The comments on the popular culture content, the legal content in the popular culture. Why? Because there are so many mistakes and omissions that should be corrected. Sometimes they could be really harmful. So that's one thing. And another thing is that with this proliferation of images and law, I think that we should think, again, it's already an ongoing process, the question of how the education of law is going to change. And I think that there's going to be more and more images, because new generations are educated in such a way, and their visual environment is such that you cannot rely only on text. So I think that there would be a great expectation from the part of students of law and so on to make it more to make the legal education more visual. Whatever we think, that's what I believe would happen inevitably. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question for Benjamin and a few for so Benjamin, I wanted to, I guess, push you further beyond the argument that there is ideology in family law, civil law, and that it was on what exactly is the change that is taking place that you're describing. The surprising element for me was that the shift seems to be towards a more essentialist view of blood relations, where courts or laws are pushing toward finding out what is the real blood relation, whereas throughout most of the Nazi regime, they are quite happy with the fiction, right? With the fiction, or at least with not knowing, but rather relying on registers of marriage or whatever without actually checking further, which is, it's a non-essentialist view of blood relations, which is surprising to me. So I was wondering if you could say more beyond.
Okay.
Okay. And shall I?
Well, I think we should.
Okay.
Well, I think in actually the National Socialist regime, the idea would have been that everybody should have made an erbbiologisches Gutachten, an biological examination, but it just didn't have the means to do so. And that's why in the first step they checked the registers, and only if there was something unclear, then they tried to make such an examination, or even if it was interest, the appellant tried to go to civil court and to contest the birth registers by filing a civil suit. Yes, so I think it's not a. I don't think that the National Socialists, they didn't want to rely on the birth registers. They were obliged to, because they didn't have the personnel to do all the work. And all this is also a very interesting point, that these institutes that were responsible for these biological examinations, they had too much work. They always write to the civil courts that we cannot bring this examination. We have to wait another month or something like this. And obviously, as the war was going longer and longer, and the personnel was not working anymore, they were on soldiers or something, and that's why they didn't have they couldn't fulfill their obligations, more or less.
Do you have a question for?
Yeah, I had three. The first one is just a comment on your exchange there. You seem to, you're discussing the way that popular culture or representations are not the real law, and there is so the sense comes across that there is a real law or a truth that, and we could place different representations on an axis of how far or close they are to the truth. Whereas I would argue, I mean, why go down that road rather than think about these different representations as forms of law, which constitute legalities where they are effective. Okay, so that's one comment. The second one is why would this kind of propaganda that you treat completely cynically now be completely convincing to someone a few tens of years ago, right? I think you want to say something about, I mean, they wouldn't be less clever than we are today, so that would be something more. And the third point is, to the extent that this is really an attempt at least to convince rather than just frighten, I would push you further to say something about what conception of justice is coming across from this. What epistemological outcome? Is it a positivist epistemology of reaching for truth in law, or I mean, what can you say about what are they trying to convince us?
Great questions. As to the first remark, I consider that we are more or less conscious about this postmodernism tsunami that went through the through the history and the humanities, and I think that it depends on the approach of a historian, even and of course legal historians in particular, if they would like to take. I think that at least one should take it into consideration, this approach. That there are this postmodern approach, Hayden White and other proposals to see your work. So you don't have to share all those convictions, but I referred to Professor Rosenstone, who wrote a brilliant article about the relations between history and movies. That he was invited to work in Hollywood, and he had a lot of doubts. He's a serious historian, so he had a lot of doubts. And then he realized that if he's not going to be in charge of it, someone else is going to do it. Maybe it's going to be not done so professionally. So he ran a risk, and then he said that. Eventually he's glad, because of course a lot of his remarks were simply dismissed and so on, but he became more conscious about how what does it mean to tell about the past in a visual and in a narrative, in a form of writing. He became more conscious about all the conventions that are in the process of writing the history, that there are also some fictional elements. So I think that's. But as to the legal propaganda, was it supposed to be convincing or not? That's a big subject. That's one of the most dreadful and wonderful at the same time questions that seems to be simply unanswered. Why to do show trials? Because that's this question. The show trials that in the 30s were even the audience is so varied. You have different kind of people, different kind of reception. For intellectuals in the West, I remember there was one writer when he was writing about, he was living in Warsaw, 1938, something like this, and he was writing about show trials. What a nonsense! What a nonsense! One cannot believe it. And therefore, these trials had its logic. And we have a lot of explanations. We could at least, and they are going from the range of explanations is very different. We have that it was a psychological need of Stalin to confirm his vision of the world, which I don't think is so convincing. But we have also explanations of another kind. That was something that should Okay, that was something that was supposed to convince those who wanted to be convinced, threaten those who were tend to be threatened, and to seem so doubts around. If we see the trials of persons like Bukharin, there was something that tarnished this memory, especially the moment when they admitted that they committed some crimes. So it's so ambiguous, all those trials, that it seems that there is still some kind of secret, some kind of mystery in it. And the mystery is our reception of those trials. Why? Because today it's true. It could be perceived in the most cynical way, but it explains very little. So I'm very sorry for this approach, but there is another approach to understand and to try to answer this question: why they wanted show trials, why Stalin and others wanted show trials, because that was a part of the system. That was not the accident. That was the part system, and that was the unique combination of theater and law.
Any more questions? Didn't you?
Yeah, but if you are... No, I just wanted to comment on the trials because I know of two studies of Soviet trials. I'm not talking about the terror, but earlier show trials. One called Performing Justice, where special fictional trials were conducted and arranged in little villages in order to have this performance of how the trial is supposed to go forward in a socialist system. And people were actors. They were reading from a special booklet, but the idea was to to have this special ritual of trial where people are accused, then they understand what they did, then they confess, and then they repent, and then they have either punished, but they can then join society and kind of acknowledge what they did. So sometimes the idea was not really whether this person committed or not committed the trial, but just the idea of the performance and the narrative of the trial as means or central. And later on, some say that actually it went vice versa. So the real trials actually then went according to the pattern of these show trials of the early 20s and other. But I don't know whether in Poland, I mean, late Stalinist period is different from the early one, so maybe we cannot transfer this the same too, but just a comment.
And it was a type of show that was common across the Soviet bloc. And so one could ask if there was a difference, for example, between Polish and Czech television, for example, in regards to the religiousness of there was some difference felt.
You mean if there were differences between show trials in the Soviet bloc? Yeah. Well, I think that because it's a huge. Even in Poland, we have. I just skip it, but in fact, what does it mean to have a show trial? Even in the Polish Film Chronicles, we have, so to say, small show trials that were concerning some sabotage in a factory, which meant that it should be presented again to millions of viewers and to convince them that even on the level of their everyday life something could happen. So yes, there were general patterns that there were impulses that came from the Soviet Union and aesthetics that was already worked out in the 30s and in the 40s, and it was simply transferred to other countries. People had in mind that it would be advisable to follow the pattern. It was not necessary to say it openly. It was enough to be conscious that, okay, here is the center, here is the periphery, we follow the pattern, which meant that, of course, it's exactly the performing justice case that even it doesn't have to be Poland. It could be the periphery of the USSR. The followers were making mistakes, and of course we could see them as some kind of distortion or an important blunder. It's as easy as that. And one thing among the interpretations of the show trials, why to admit to one of this explanation that is really convincing is no heroes in the opposition. If they admit, even if they were forced, tortured and so on, they are not black and white heroes. And therefore this memory stays that they admitted that they've committed some kind of crime, and it's extremely important for the legitimacy of the regime. So I think if we are looking for the lessons from totalitarianism, I think that still the best sources are Solzhenitsyn and others that analyze this phenomenon through and through, and were conscious that there are some patterns of behavior that were discovered, and patterns of behavior of a man in front of the law that were discovered during the communist era, and we tend to forget or put them somehow aside. I think we shouldn't.
One last remark, because I just want to quote Lenin in your case, because I just remembered he said that the most important form of art is cinema. So that's your answer. Why they try to use cinema and to legal propaganda? I guess it's an instrument, very good instrument to do so.
That's whole true. Although some say that it was not Lenin but Lunacharsky. But I could add something really funny. Trotsky believed that cinema, and that's the power of cinema of that era, believed that the cinema is going to erase alcoholism. So that was their belief. They believe that if people go to cinemas, they are going to watch movies, they are not going to drink vodka.
So this was Trotsky's idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you to all the speakers and to all your comments, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.